All right. It's race week. Zion 100 kicks off this Saturday morning. And all week this week, I'm just getting super hyped, super excited, preparing for travel, preparing gear. But today, I want to review season 1 of this podcast as it winds down. No new guests talking about late race survival. Today, I'm going to run through them all and as concisely as possible communicate my takeaway from them. What are the things that I will be remembering about these conversations, these individuals? What have they passed on to me? I'm going to do this. I have not prepared in advance on purpose. I'm going to look at the name of the person in the podcast and I'm going to recall something from it because I've really made conscious effort along the way to absorb what they have, what they've given me. So doing this from memory, it's a fun exercise for me, but I think it's going to be great for you. Grab a pen and paper because we're gonna reduce some of these rather long conversations down to hopefully some actionable, items that you can write down and meditate on and think about during your next run, or even just play back this podcast. Before we get into it, though, if you've enjoyed Borderlands in any way, I mean, where I'm at right now with building the community is not doing much in the way of monetizing, but it is what I'm doing full time with my life, is Borderlands. And so if you like the podcast, if you've enjoyed it, if you'd go to borderlands.cc, we've got some merch there that you could buy, stickers and some DFL before DNF, shirts and hoodies, and just crew neck sweatshirts. I'd be super grateful if you're digging it and you wanted to buy that. I've been kicking around Patreon. I'm not certain. I'm not convinced that that's the right route for this. But in the meantime, I don't put too much mental strength into that because I'm able to just be focused on the content and building the community and engaging with you. Also, super grateful. If you haven't downloaded Wilder app, it's going really well. I mean, by and large, those of you who have offered feedback has been either positive feedback or constructive criticism that's helping make it better. And the positive feedback is great. The constructive criticism is actually better. It's what I need right now. So if you're willing to share that with me, I'd be super grateful. And that way we can continue to make that better. Wilder, the goal of Wilder is to be a tool that you use in your run clubs. Right now it has simple functions of group chat and scheduling a group run. There's plenty more on the way if I can prove the viability and optimize those to where, you all who have run clubs of 2 to 15 people are actually using it day in and day out. And so far, it looks like a lot of you are. And I'm super grateful and thankful that you're doing that. And I hope that you're doing it because it's actually useful. That would be the dream come true. All right. So Zion, Saturday. Here's what I'm going to be thinking in my head. Like, again, I'm somewhat of a veteran at this, but my mind has been the weakest thing, and so I endeavored in season 1 of this podcast to just get as much wisdom as possible. And so I'll go back to episode 1 was Elsa Jaworski. I think my key takeaway from Elsa is that she knows how to party and she knows how to turn things into a good time. I was out just on a run. I did like 16, 17 miles at, where was it? At Buffalo this last week when everyone else was, doing the actual race, the Buffalo 100 or 100K or whatever, and saw a ton of people out there. Elsa was one of them, and she seemed to be having a great time. She was running. And then I come across some other friends, Ben Sorensen. He's like, oh yeah, we saw Elsa. She was from the first episode of your podcast. She was running uphill and she was singing. I thought, what a perfect snapshot of her and turning that race into, a party and turning it into something that is fun. In her words, like she paid a lot of money for these races. And at the very least on that level, she's going to make sure that she has a good time. So I got that coming. Jeremy Cox was episode 2. He had a lot of good things, but one of them was to put my ego into it. I'm fairly low ego about these things, and it's because I have a low self-confidence when it comes to these, even prior to my DNFs. And so I just always thought, hey, if I DNF, and that's fine. But Jeremy's like, put some ego into it, make it matter if you DNF. And so in this one, I'm going into it like putting my ego into it. I'm actually feeling like I've never felt before in terms of I would actually be shocked if I didn't finish this race. It would have to be a legit injury that forces me to stop. Episode 3 was Dylan Bowman, someone I've been a fan of, been a fan of Free Trail for a long time, and him just as a runner. My takeaway from him, I think about his run at his first 100-miler at Leadville. I asked him what was going through his head at the starting line with regard to finishing, and he said it wasn't even a doubt in my mind. I had there like zero doubt at the start line that there would be any possibility of a DNF. It was not a matter of if, it was a matter of how fast. And sure, he's elite, but I think that mentality can work for me at the starting line. That's where I'm feeling it's like, it's not a matter of if I'm going to finish this one. It's a matter of how fast. And to have that confidence, I think is critical. Episode 4 was Jesse Rich. I've referenced him in so many episodes following that, and probably even prior to that. I think his insight on nutrition has been tremendously helpful, but the key takeaway from his was that 30% of the calories we consume goes to our brain. And so if we don't feed our brains, then there's absolutely no chance that we're going to be able to make a good decision about continuing to move forward. If we don't feed our brains, we will try and push ourselves to stop. And I've had intention with my nutrition at my races, but I've never had like straight up strategy. I've had maybe some calorie goals, but not been thinking carbs. And so all of these, thanks to Jesse, just in that conversation, and following him on Instagram, he just brings some of the best nutrition insight. And I've said it over and over again. I can't recommend him enough to follow him and get more. Michael Whiteside, man, this is fun to think about. He said something, I'm not going to quote it exactly right, but the bottom line was that he said nothing was, how did he word it? He said everything was fine, it just hurt. And I thought, I've never thought of everything being fine and everything just hurting. I'd been thinking, hey, if everything's hurting, things are not fine. It was just like it was like a paradigm shift of like, oh, things can be hurting, body can be, in absolute pain, and things can be fine. I think that's a tremendous shift in mindset to say pain is not always bad. Though, yes, pain is telling your mind something, but it's not always bad. You can obviously choose to push through it, choose to not, and that's where Casey Brady's discussion that I'll talk about later comes in. But everything was fine. It was just hurting. And I think, oh, that's so simple. It absolutely like guts the power of pain, of non, life-threatening pain, of non, running. The future of my running will not be compromised on certain pains. And so if I can just say everything's fine, it's just hurting. I've not done that. So thanks to Michael for that. And then Anthony Costales, who, I've been a fan of, elite runner, Nike Elite. What I also love about him is that his day job is that he's a teacher. And one of the reasons he chose Nike as his sponsor is because they'll support him in his desire to continue teaching PE, which is just awesome. He's got a clear, like, gentleness to him that would mean I would really love for my kids to be in his PE class. And then on the trail, Western States getting third place, he's an absolute competitor, and I know he can flip that switch. So what I loved about him was I said that at Western, it seemed like he was always smiling. He said that's the camera angles. But after we chatted some more, what is true is that he had old buddies, that were supporting him in that race. And so when it was just a lift to his spirit, like to see them at aid stations, they genuinely made him laugh. He was genuinely happy to see them. And between that and his wife and his kid, there's the takeaway is like, make sure you have people waiting for you at the aid station that you are looking forward to seeing, because it's an absolute boost. Matt Johnson was next. there were a lot of takeaways. Matt's kind of like a walking soundbite. If you follow him on Instagram, super character. We actually flew to Austin because I just wanted to chat with him more. He's just different than the average ultra guy. He's a little bit in the weightlifting world, it seems, or whatever that would be. The Nick Bear world works with Nick Bear, but Matt is how should we say, his mindset take was, you show up at the starting line and you say I'm the best in the world. And then when you get 976th place, you say, see, I told you. And so at first I thought, okay, Matt, you're just being cocky. And hey, you could potentially pull off a fast time. You probably could be really great at the 100-miler. And so you could say I'm the best in the world and finish 4th or 6th. But no, he was saying, no, tell yourself you're the best in the world. Tell your friends they're the best in the world. And then even if you finish last place, you are still the best in the world. Like, have that mentality of believing in yourself on that level. And again, that's just not who I am. I in fact, that's a very off-putting mentality to me by and large, to be around someone that's like that with themselves. But I'm absolutely embracing it. Like, I have to let myself be a little bit impressed by what I'm doing at Zion on Saturday. And I've never done that, Mike, because I've just been negative about myself. Like, yeah, you're doing it, but you don't belong out here. Or you're doing this 100-miler, but you're not only are you not the best, you are highly likely the worst. And Matt's takeaway was like, no, you're the best, no matter what. And then no matter what happens that day, you're the best. That's a real challenging new way of thinking for me. Candace Burt, man, she had some gold. She started the Tahoe 200, Bigfoot 200, Moab 240. She's got the Arizona Monster 300 coming up next year. I really appreciated hers because she really understood what I was talking about, like where my mind would go to this place where I would be looking to the future and thinking, hey, if this little thing that's happening right now gets out of control, my kids grow up without a dad. But right now, all it is my side hurts. And so her practice was that she had to, and going for her world record attempt of 200 consecutive days of 50 kilometers or more, she constantly had to say to herself, or maybe ask herself, is everything okay right now? Don't think about where this little problem is going. Don't think about how my kids might be 20 years from now as a result of dad being an obsessed trail runner. Is everything okay now? And if everything is okay now, then you can keep going. And I really appreciated that. Tamar Hicks made me laugh. He got the half marathon world record for half marathon while wearing handcuffs. He announced that on the podcast with me, and I was pretty stoked on that. From the takeaway from him was mechanics. Like, we don't always think about mechanics in trail running because sometimes it's just like we know it's going to be sloppy. Middle to back of the pack, we know we're going to be sloppy. We know we're not going to be in top form. We're not going to look great. Not going to be performing. We're going to be doing the ultra shuffle, barely picking up our legs, kicking rocks, falling over. And one of the takeaways from Tamar, just from his, I think, world-class Instagram content, was to engage my hamstrings, like pick up my legs, like freaking pick up my legs and stop shuffling when you've got some strength, because the hamstring muscles are very strong muscles. And so to let them go 100 miles largely unused is an actual waste of muscle. And so I've really throughout my training this time tried to use my hamstrings more in my running and lifting my legs up, lifting my knees up. Because using that stronger muscle requires less cardio, so my heart rate could go down a little bit when I'm in better form. But all in all, Tamar's a good follow on Instagram. He's always bringing really helpful stuff, even though he's not an ultra guy himself. He's a optimized for halves and fulls, and he's fast. His world record with handcuffs is in half marathons was 1 hour and 20. So imagine if he could use his arms. Tommy Green, he ran across Utah from north to south, and he had a lot of problems along the way. He, self-proclaimed non-runner. He was doing it to put attention on human trafficking. He has an organization called Run Against Traffic. He had people from all over supporting him as he was raising money, putting awareness on this. Brian Welch from Korn came out to support him. Like there was a lot of attention on what Tommy was doing. And I think, Tommy's a community builder. He's extremely infectious personality, loved to be around. And he talked about almost like his secret, or my takeaway was that his was almost reactionary. Like the support that came out for him was incredible in what he was trying to do. And what I need to do, because I've had so many of you be supportive to me, and my family is supportive to me, and my friends are supportive to me. Tommy was able to receive that support. I often will deflect that support away, thinking, oh, if you only knew how ugly or sloppy or bad this was going to be, you wouldn't, you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't engage with me. You wouldn't be supportive. Tommy's the opposite. Like he was able to receive it. And, that's, I admire that. And I feel like there's been a shift in me in being able to receive the support. Troy Meadows is the host of the Midpacker podcast. He's just an encouraging guy all around, and he gets the middle and the back of the pack hustle, the training that we go through, the slower training. 2 hours for us maybe sometimes is only 7 to 10 miles or 7 to 8 miles, maybe less depending on the elevation gain and loss. But he just an encourager, just continuing to go. He talked about being a grindstone and seeing his kid, late in that race, and just the jolt that gave him. And so my takeaway, my hope, again, it's like this receiving the good things that are around me instead of deflecting those things that are around me. He received that, the gift of getting to see his kid and letting that have an impact on him, and not trivializing, oh, I'm just trying to run 100 miles. It was, this is important to me. Now I see my kid. That's a good boost. Let's go. Michael Versteeg, far and away the most listened to episode. People are very intrigued by Michael. What I love about him is that he represents an era. Even though he's a little bit younger than me, he kind of has the early 2000s, late 90s vibe of trail running, where he does it because he loves it. He also does a lot of other things. He's had some success. He won the first Cocodona 250. He was the first athlete sponsored by Satisfy, and I think from a branding standpoint, just a perfect match. He has the Saddles 100 that he puts on. And what I love is that he has this super punk rock attitude of, I'm just going to do it because I want to do it. And if I don't want to do it, I'm going to stop. But for me, sometimes the hard thing is letting myself do what I want to do. I get stuck in this, what am I supposed to do? What should I do? And man, Michael Versteeg was awesome about, like, I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to do it because I want to do it. And that to me can sometimes be off-putting if I see that quality in myself, but seeing it in someone else, it's like, oh, I admire it. I admire it so much. Michael McKnight, which, by the way, I've had like 20% of this show be Michael's, lots of Michael's. Michael McKnight, the 200-mile specialist, Triple Crown winner of the 200-milers. He's heavy emphasis on nutrition, and another personality that's like quiet, kind, but get him on the trail and he's like, brutal competitor, scheming on how to take you out and, how to win that race that he's in. If I were to think back of what our conversation was like, how does he suffer? I remember asking him, how does he keep going when he is so tired? Like the look on his face, if you've seen documentaries of him going for the Colorado FKT, and you just think he's absolutely done. Like if I had to look on my face, I would have, take me to the hospital. Or one of his Cocodona attempts, he had rhabdo. He couldn't finish. Michael, it just embodies like this commitment to what he's set out to do. So if he's going to get the Colorado FKT, he's going to literally go until he can't. And what I love about that is that I would think, oh, don't do that because then you don't live to run another day. And he's running better than ever. So you can go until you can't move anymore and you will be fine. And I think Michael embodies like crushing it with that mentality, winning race after race with that mentality, while at the same time, uh, sometimes his body just forcibly stops him, like with the rhabdomyolysis at the Cocodona. Brian Ames, I would call him a hot sauce mogul. Uh, Owns skateboarding companies. So we talked about the connection of skateboarding and ultra running, which I thought was super cool. And then he's a backyard runner kind of guy. He Ohio's backyard was the big race for him. And I think one of my takeaways is being impressed with him from entrepreneur to entrepreneur, of seeing the massive scope, the wide swath of what he does in his daily life when it comes to hot sauce and his skateboarding companies. And he's got skateboard wheels, and he's got all sorts of other stuff, apparel companies, and then he'll still put away like big weeks. And he's got, he's a dad, so he's still out there going for it. I think I was just inspired by the scope, and also resonating with him of feeling similar. And I'm ambitious in my career. I'm ambitious as a family man, and I'm ambitious out on the trail. Alex Mueller it was cool. She's a former pro tennis player, 20 years of experience. I mean, the number of titles that she had won in those 20 years, she was ranked in the top 120 in the world of tennis players in the world, I think at the pinnacle. And she just got the bug of trail running. My takeaway from that was just a reminder of just how great this sport is. I love talking to people who have come into the sport recently. And man, it's a beautiful thing to just talk to someone who just loves it. She carries around a journal, and she writes in that journal to, anytime she hears about a new race, she'll write in that journal that she wants to do that race, or to look into this or look into that. And she brings this elite tennis player mentality of like competitor wanting to do well. And so it was fun to talk about the connection between elite tennis and how she prepares for ultras, and how she thinks about ultras, and how she connects with the community. Colby Sharp, I love his demeanor on so many levels. And I think one of the things that's been especially endearing to me is that he's a 5th grade teacher, and my son is in 5th grade. I even reached out to him for some advice on some problems we were having at school. And he offered some insight. Same type, gentle, pushes hard, loves his job, as an influencer when it comes to kids' books. And influencer is maybe not the right word. He just loves kids' books and wants other people to love kids. Like wants to create a generation of readers, and I think that's super cool. And he's clearly good at it. But then he's got this like 1,700-day run streak, and those, and it's not just a couple. It's not just a mile. Like if you follow him on Strava, he'll, or on Instagram, it'll be a 6-mile day or a 10-mile day. But I especially loved his commitment to it. And, I imagine as a run streaker, I've never been that gets in your head and it's hard to not run. But he was in a tropical storm in the Caribbean and couldn't go out and run. He was going to lose that day. And instead he ran around his Airbnb and got the miles in from inside an Airbnb in a tropical storm. Andrew Glaze, a lot of people are inspired by Andrew Glaze. Or I guess Andy Glaze. I don't know what he prefers these days publicly. I see Andrew or Andy. He's the guy that's, if you're not smiling, you're doing it wrong. I did appreciate him, I would say, disparaging the idea that Carl Meltzer puts forward of, hey, it's just 100 miles. Like, you can do it. It's just 100 miles. He comes from the opposite perspective of like, no, don't talk it down like that. Like 100 miles is hard. And Andrew's doing 100 mile. He's doing 100 plus miles a week every week. And he's been doing that for he's probably like 210 consecutive weeks of 100 plus miles of running a week. And he runs more than probably a dozen 100-mile races a year. And he says he's still scared, nervous, overwhelmed at the starting line of those races. So don't go into that mentality that maybe an elite runner might go into of like, oh, it's just 100 miles. No, don't ever let it become that. Let it always be. This is probably my takeaway from him. Let it always be special. Let it always be meaningful. Never just say like, oh, it's just like a 5K. Like, no, this is 100 miles. This is always a big deal. And you should always be proud of yourself for towing that starting line and going for the finish. Bart Lee, starting to see a theme here. a lot of people who are just kind, and maybe this is what ultra running does to you. Like it forces you into this meditative thing of place in your head of being kind to people and having more grace on people. But Bart just said when he consults people on nutrition, if you don't buy Oreos at the grocery store, then you're not gonna snack on Oreos when you're at home. So the good decision starts at the grocery store. And where we ended up equating that was if you don't put quitting, if you don't pick up quitting from the grocery store, it's not in the pantry when you're on your run. So you can't even look at it. And I've always had quitting in the pantry. And so I can get to an aid station and I think, okay, am I going to quit here? Man, maybe, yes, no. Well, this time going into this race, thanks to Bart giving me language, giving me the concept and then giving me language for it, I've seen it kind of pervasive in all things. And that is, I don't even quitting's not an option. It's not in the pantry. So if I didn't bring it home, if I'm not bringing the idea of quitting with me to Zion, then I can't pull it off the shelf when I get home and get lazy, so to speak. I really appreciate Bart for that. Tommy Lewis, I loved it. He talked about running, and when you hit a wall when you're running, find the door. That the wall is not the end. It's never the end. There is always a door. And one of the signs of maturity as a runner is to, even if you're in the dark and you've hit the wall, is to use your hands and feel around until you find the door. Because when you open that door and you can get to the other side, that's Narnia. That's the promised land. That's the land of milk and honey. That's the place. Those are the feelings. That's the place we're all trying to get to. But if you hit the wall and let it kill you, let it cause you to quit, end your effort, you should still be proud of yourself. But if you can find the door and get to the other side, that's Narnia. I love that. In episode 20, I got to talk to Hal Kerner. And while we didn't maybe expressly talk about late race survival and surviving the late race urge to quit, it was just an absolute honor to get to talk to Hal. And he won the first 5 Bear 100s from 1999 to 2004. I think I'm correct on that, if not the first 4. Beyond that, I mean, he'd won Western States a couple of times. He'd won Hard Rock. Just an iconic runner. And where he fits into our community, though, is that he's the type of runner who it was before gear was really, what it is now, before the sport really was what it was now. So he was really doing it for love and being at the top of his game and being among the highest performing ultra runners out there. He still had to have a day job. And so I think we resonated with that because he still operated sort of like what we'd call the no podium runner, where he's just doing it because he loves it. He's super competitive and obviously fast. And he was winning these super iconic, super famous races. But my takeaway from him was just like this spirit of love and obsession with the pureness of the sport. He talked about, running in a fanny pack. There were no like ultra running packs. We had a fanny pack that he would wear, or, the old duct taping of water bottles to your hand, or taking a nylon strap of some kind and rigging it up yourself and engineering it yourself. And I just love that sort of grittiness. Then Philip Spear in episode 21 was really interesting. He's in Austin and he's the chef at Comedor Restaurant and he leads the Comedor Run Club, which is just a massive run club that's all about giving servers and people in the industry better things to do when they're not on shift. It's an industry notorious for the amount of drinking post shift and partying post shift. And Philip himself is in recovery. And so he had found running to be just this incredible sort of respite from the chaos that comes with the industry he loves. He's a phenomenal chef. He was a 4-time nominated James Beard Award chef, pastry chef. And my takeaway from Philip was, essentially that we treat running sometimes like a hobby, but it is also sometimes a means of recovery. Like it is so important to us. It's more important to us than we know. And when you hear someone who's open about their recovery, talk about the meaning of running in their life, it just makes you feel like something that already feels special almost starts to become sacred. And so to not take it for granted and to overthink it in a way that's makes it disparaging to remember like this power that comes with being able to run an ultra run. And, you know, he's been an ultra trail runner and he's marathoner. And at the age of 47, he just got a PR at the marathon distance, and just encouraging to know like there's much life to come in this world of running. Then I interviewed one of my best friends from high school with another best friend from high school, Ryan Mansell, who is Army Special Forces, Green Beret. And, you know, there's a lot of people like, you know, that have this Special Forces background that are in the public narrative right now. And so it was really interesting to talk to someone I knew really well 25 years ago that I haven't really talked to much since then. Explain, you know, ways of surviving things that are really difficult to survive. And much of it for him was life or death or preparing for life or death. And while ours isn't that, what I appreciated about Ryan was that he was very validating in this 100-mile dream that I have of saying that it is important, even though for Ryan, he was probably in scenarios where things were genuinely life and death, far more important to more people. One of my many takeaways from Ryan was that it's okay to really want this the way that I want it. And I really appreciated that. Alex Horn is an evolutionary biologist, C-17 pilot, works for the Department of Defense in their innovations unit now. And he's an ultra runner. And he worked in David Carrier's lab, David Carrier is who Chris McDougall talks about in Born to Run as the morphologist who knows the history from an evolutionary standpoint of our foot and how it evolved to become what it is. Alex was in his lab, and Alex worked on something interesting and very different from morphology, and that is he worked on the impact of vasopressin and oxytocin on PTSD, people with PTSD. But his control group was ultra runners, and I was in that control group. And I thought it was just really interesting to understand the oxytocin being this like bonding thing that causes us to bond more. He said it's what women who are going into labor, they have a lot of oxytocin. It's what helps them to look forward to it, to be able to endure something like that. And on the other end is vasopressin. It's this stressor. It's an antidiuretic. It keeps us. So like when you're out running these long efforts and you need to pee, or you drink a ton of water and you're surprised that you're not peeing, it's because you had your vasopressin, possibly because your vasopressin has spiked so much, has gone up so high that it's not letting your body get rid of the liquid the way that it normally would, because you're in such a stressed state. But my key takeaway from Alex was piggybacking on Jesse Rich's insight, which Jesse's was your brain takes 30% of the calories. Alex came from an evolutionary standpoint and said, yeah, your executive function requires those calories. But what happens when you don't have the executive function is, from an evolutionary standpoint, is what he would call like the reptile brain. And that reptile brain is very simple. It has very few goals. And one of those goals is certainly not to run 100 miles. So if you don't feed your brain appropriately and keep the executive function of your brain nourished, then the part of your brain that kicks in is just going to destroy you, and you're going to stop. You're not giving yourself a fighting chance because the reptile brain wants to stop you. After Alex, I got to interview Chris McDougall, and we mostly just talked. I mean, I was just kind of like, fanboy, talking to the author that introduced more people to ultra running than probably anybody ever will through his book, Born to Run. We talked about, kind of where are they now? What are people up to? He talked about Caballo Blanco's death and untimely death, and just interesting to get to hear things from his perspective. But, he's still all in on the barefoot or the minimalist running. And while I'm not, his prescription to me on, is that, hey, if you're minimalist and barefoot running, you're not going to have the toenail problems that you have, which I thought was interesting. But more than anything, I think my takeaway from Chris was just like ultimate stoke level on the sport that we're in. And So cool to just get to talk to somebody who was like that, who has had that much influence. And then Jamil Gaskins, who's a former business partner of mine. He's a restaurateur. He's been in hospitality. He ran food and beverage for Ace Hotels for a number of years before coming to Salt Lake City. He has a lot of other claims to fame within that industry. We did a video where he went on his very first trail run with us. And then he just finished his very first trail race. He did the half marathon of Vacation Races at Antelope Canyon. And it was just really cool to hear from someone who'd never gone on a trail race, just what it was like. And so to be reminded of just how meaningful this sport is. And again, fitness matters. Fitness is important, but fitness is oftentimes among the least valuable thing that's happening when we're out there. And that's I also call it a hypothesis. But Jamil just validating that. Like, yeah, he had done the work, the hay was in the barn, and then he still went out there. And, as Mike Tyson says, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And it's just great to hear resiliency of someone needing that resiliency for the first time. So Jamil's story just motivated me that episode. Then Devin Yanko, who had just done Lululemon's Further. I had reached out to her before I knew the date of Further. Of course, I'd heard of Further. I just reached out to her because I think she makes a great contribution to the sport, and I wanted to talk to her about what she's up to, what she's doing next. And she's like, "Hey, I'm about to do Further. Let's talk after that. I think it'll be even more interesting." And what I thought was cool, because like if Chris McDougall talks about like we were born to run, like we are, everything about who we are is optimized for running. The way that Devin's episode piggybacked on that is that she said that this 6-day race, which was what Further was, it was a 6-day race. How far can you go in 6 days? Has actually been around since the 1700s. And in fact, she said in the late 1870s, when women were doing this race at Madison Square Garden, the women actually did more miles than Devin just did at Further. And the asterisk on that is that Devin had some real issues on day 1 and day 2, maybe even to 3. I don't remember exactly where she reemerged and got back out there. But just that, just more encouragement that this ultra thing is really deeply ingrained in the parts of us that we almost have no control over. Like it's completely pervasive. Then I talked to if I'm feeling overwhelmed about my 100-mile effort, it was really nice to talk to Caden Coleman and Josh Landvatter, or Landy. They are both doing Grand Slams this summer. They're both doing 4 100-milers. And I should say so is Devin Yanko, and she's doing Comrades. But it's just when someone has something that is literally 4 times more involved than what I'm doing, 4 times longer than what I'm doing, and you see this confidence in them and that they're going to be able to do not just finish 1, but they're going to finish 4 of them in, a 3 to 4 month period, is actually quite encouraging and almost calming. But, it's breeds confidence. That's for sure. After that episode, I talked to Mike Herrera of MXPX, and I know that feels like super random. Like, what does Mike Herrera of MXPX have to do with ultra running? He's not an ultra runner. He's fit. He's a runner to some degree, but he's not out, putting out 50Ks. But he's been putting out, in my opinion, great music for 30. At this point, his band started 32 years ago. Their first album came out 30 years ago, and their most recent album came out last year. I just saw them in concert 2 nights ago, and they're just still going hard. Like, still fun. I mean, they're just still going. And I think that with that being like the money question on all these is, how do you keep going even when you want to quit? We talked about that for a while with Mike, and sometimes it's the results. Sometimes it's just something that's so deep in you, regardless of how people receive it. You have to get it out. And then finally, another musician, I talked to Mickey Rayfield, who'd been playing harmonica with Willie Nelson for since 1973, so 51 years at this point. More about that longevity. And Mickey's an endurance cyclist. He's 72 years old. He was my dad's best friend when they were in elementary and junior high. And just to hear that when he's had on tour with Willie, or when he's out with Chris Stapleton, or when he was playing with the Highwaymen, Johnny Cash. I mean, he played with Bruce Springsteen. He's literally played with everybody who's ever been, a huge hit. Just that he's able to keep going, and that is sort of the synthesis of all of this. I'm doing this within ultra running, but the larger connection here, and this is where Mickey and even Mike Herrera come in, is that I do it, yes, because I love running, and the goal lives and is contained itself within running. It's a running goal that I have, but the potential for these major efforts to make someone better as an individual is huge. And I think that's what you see in someone like Mickey or Mike. Like, they're still bettering themselves as a human to enable to continue doing what they do. And so as I go into Zion on this Saturday, like all of these things, again, I did all of this without any notes. This was just, I really tried to absorb everything that these interesting interviewees gave me. Oh, how did I do this? I forgot Casey Brady. Casey was answered among my most important question was, how do you know when you have an injury in the middle of your race that you can push through? Or how do you know if that injury is something that would necessitate stopping? I mean, I don't know if you're like me. That's like the question, because I'll get injured and I'll think, okay, or like something's hurting really bad. Maybe muscles are really tight, but it's causing so much like change in how I'm running, or whether or not I'm able to run at all. And so how do you know if you should stop or not? And I feel like this is a perfect way to end this episode. Like, her takeaway was like, hey, globally, like on the highest level, if you hear a pop, there's likely no scenario where a pop in your body is going to be something that you should push through. Her husband is an orthopedic surgeon. Casey is a physical therapist, and they were in an ultra together. And forgive me, maybe her ankle popped. And not only did she hear it and feel it, her husband heard it, running near her. And so that pop, she pushed through it for a little while and ultimately warranted justifiably a DNF. So you have that. And then you got things like if your gait is changing and progressively getting worse. So maybe your gait changes and it stabilizes. You can probably push through that. But if it's progressively getting worse, that's a good sign that you need to stop. But by and large, a lot of things that I have thought would warrant stopping, coming from a physical therapist with a ton of ultra running experience, said that maybe that's not the case. And so that among all of the wisdom, I really feel like Casey Brady's is one of the ones that, like, when I think about wanting to come home and be able to still pick up my kids, or still be a useful contributor to my family. That's why Casey's conversation was super helpful for me, is to think like, is there long-term damage? Is there not going to be long-term damage? She gave me some really good stuff to think about. I highly recommend all of these episodes, but if that's you, then her episode 27 is great. All right. So I got a lot coming this week. Tomorrow's episode is going to be me with all the people who are going to be at the starting line with me. It'll be me, Jeremy, Alex, and Ryan, just going through the race strategy. How are we going to approach running together? What all are we putting in our drop bags? Where are we putting our drop bags? We're going to talk about the course. We're going to really geek out. And so if you want to see how people think in advance about these big efforts, I think it'll be a fun conversation, and fun and funny. But until then, thanks for joining me.